Good afternoon.
Because you're facing the wrong way.
Yes, sir.
I'm always encouraged by those who are willing to stay the course on the last day and the last panel. So welcome, and I hope that we can have an intimate conversation since we're just a few of us. This session is about driving the implementation of the women empowerment principles. Just by a show of hands, how many of you in the room have heard of, interacted with, or know about the women empowerment principles?
Wow.
Most everyone except a few of you, okay? So we'll have a chance to understand what the women empowerment principles are, but more importantly, to get a sense of what it takes to implement them and how you can drive them. I imagine for those of us in the room, how many of you are from a corporate company? Okay, and you want to learn how to drive women empowerment principles in your company, yeah? How many of you are women entrepreneurs? All right, and you want to figure out how to take over the business supply chain, etc., in those businesses? So how many of you then are policymakers who want to convince businesses to sign up to women empowerment principles? Okay, what category have I left out? How many of you are from government? Yeah? How many of you are from the UN or multilateral agencies? Okay? NGOs who are working in this space? I think we got it covered. Who have I left out?
Investors. Associations?
Associations of women businesses? Investors. So we're going to have a very interesting conversation about that. And just women with, what did she call, what's the name of your company again? Women who dare at 50 plus. Okay, so those of us who dare at 50 plus. So welcome. We're going to have a wonderful and intimate conversation today. So I have a great group of women who are part of this panel. My first member of the panel is my very dear colleague with whom we work very well together, Anna Falth. It's an interesting name because every time people see Anna's name, they're not sure whether to call her Faith or it's Falth. So Anna is responsible for women's empowerment principles at UN Women and working on women's economic empowerment. And in a minute, Anna is going to make a presentation to us about the women empowerment principles at UN Women and how we think about that work. So I'll let you have a chance in a minute. Diana van Maasdijk is with Equileap. And Equileap is an exciting organization that is giving us the kind of data that we need to be able to track this work. And again, she'll talk about it herself. And then we have Alice Laughter, wonderful name. And I wondered whether or not we believe in African societies that if we give you a name, like we call you blessing, or we call you happiness, or God knows that will be imbibed in who you are. So Alice Laughter, I imagine there's a lot of joy in your life. And she has a day job and a night job. And she'll talk about that. But in her day job, she has her own organization that does amazing work in post-conflict and conflict countries, working across the world with committed to good. Yeah, CTG, and she'll talk about it. But she also co-chairs the UN Global Compact organization here in UAE that works with the women empowerment principles, and she'll share that story with us. And then we have Veronica. Veronica Roux is Sodexo's Senior Vice President of Business Development and Sales in the Middle East. And Sodexo is an organization, a company that works really is it's on the list of companies that have done really good work in women empowerment principles. So let's get started. I think, I work in South Africa at UN Women, and we have the privilege in South Africa of having one of those countries whose data tells us that women are doing really well. So we have 44% women in parliament. We have requirement in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange that every company should have a gender policy. We have 51 companies that are signatories to the women empowerment principles. But despite that, we find that only 1 out of 40 of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange companies has a CEO. Mind you, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange chairperson, CEO, COO, CFO are all women. So it's an incredible story, but the companies themselves who sit on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, only 1 out of the 40 actually have a woman as a CEO. We've done quite well on the data front in terms of women in employment, and we've got about 44% women. But what we do see is that as you go up into senior management of the companies, it trickles down to about 10 to 11%. What is sad about this South Africa data, and it might explain why it shifted, you see, our former executive director used to be deputy president. She hasn't been there for the 5 years, so we haven't seen as much progress since then. But I just have this interesting data that since September 2002, this data has stayed the same in South Africa. So the 44% labor numbers and the numbers at the senior level has remained the same. We are doing a little bit better on procurement than that global 1%. We have about between 8 and 9% of women-owned companies that supply to the public sector and to the private sector, but it's still only 8 to 9%, and so we're still quite far. And then on unpaid labor, on equal pay, we remain at the 23 to 25% of equal pay. And so there's a lot of work to do. I think the other big figure that we know about in South Africa is the issue of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and discrimination in general in the workplace. We still see that more and more, and we have a draft report of the current state of procurement and in the companies that we were actually just reviewing a week ago, and that is telling us that sexual harassment is rife in many of the organizations. And so when we look at the women empowerment principles, I'm going to ask Anna to do this presentation and share with us a little bit about what we know globally and where we are and how we're thinking about this work before we dig into hearing what's going on in other parts of the world. So, Anna?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the presentation is coming up.
Yes. There we go.
Yep. So I'm very excited because I start to think in WEPs terms. So whenever you talk about an issue, I already plotted against the 7 WEPs and covered, I think, all of them. One that was missing was number 7, which we will go into more details. So the Women's Empowerment Principles, for those who know about them, they have existed since 2010. That's when we launched them together with the UN Global Compact. And it had followed a 2-year of a process of consultations to really make sure that these principles are covering all the aspects that we need to drive as part of the gender equality agenda. There are 7 principles, and it's really giving companies a platform to mobilize action against the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a framework regardless of the size, sector, geography. It can be applied everywhere. And while the WEPs are for the corporate sector, currently to be eligible, it's a corporate entity with more than 10 employees. It is applicable for any organization to implement the 7 principles. Today we have 1,665 signatories. I have just put a few countries just to show you the range of countries and how they differ. So currently on the lead is Turkey, that just bypassed 2 weeks ago Japan. It's in the 230 range companies in those 2 countries. And then we have South Africa, 51. We have UAE, actually I can see it from here, it's 25 in the UAE.
Brazil.
So there's a lot of scope for improvement. Brazil is actually number 3. And it also shows a little bit on where there has been a strong push. And we will hear from Alice later on how she is working in getting this, how quickly she has grown the number to 25. But also how her strategy on how to get beyond the 25 to actually start competing with Japan and Turkey, right? So just to give you a sense of that, there are some markets that is really, really a great push, and we will hear from the other speakers as well. But it really starts with the WEP number 1, which is very, very important, and it requires anyone that would like to sign on to the Women's Empowerment Principles that the CEO is signing the CEO Statement of Support. This is a requirement to have the top leadership on board, but also to have a gender equality strategy and to get the corporate board and the executive team on board for it as well. What I didn't mention is that this is voluntary guidelines. There is no way any obligation, but this is the guidelines that we would like to see all of the companies that sign on to the WEPs to aspire towards. But this is the first step, is really to get the leadership on board. I have clustered them because time is limited. So number 2, 3, and 4 are covering the workplace issues. And it goes from number 2 that covers the recruitment, retention, promotion, etc. It also talks about equal pay, flexi time, telework, parental leave, etc. Number 3, which Anne was touching upon, is very important. It talks about zero violence, harassment, sexual exploitation, and I think we'll cover some of this today as well, as health, safety, and hygiene. So these are very, very important topics. Number 4 focuses on education and training of women in the workplace. The marketplace, number 5, we had a session earlier today about the supply chain and corporate procurement. This is very important to make sure that even though we have a good environment in one company, that gender equality and gender responsiveness in the workplace is extended in the supply chain. So we would like each of the WEPs companies to also encourage the suppliers to sign on to the WEPs and to also source from women entrepreneurs. And responsible marketing practices is also, we have a coalition now with the Unstereotype Alliance that are focusing in to make sure that nothing in advertising and marketing has gender stereotypes. So there's a big movement on that at the moment as well. 6 is around community engagement, to really understand the community around the company. And most importantly, transparency, measuring, and reporting. And this is, we will hear also from Diana later in her presentation on how important it is to collect data and to drive change through data. So the question is, how do you get started? For those in the room that would like to get involved and make a commitment, is first of all to sign the WEPs. Some companies decide to sign as soon as they hear about it and are ready to make that commitment and drive change. Some prefer to actually have done some action before they sign so that they know what they're getting themselves into. We have, and you will see also in the UN Women booth, we launched in March the gap analysis tool, which is a self-assessment tool, is completely confidential. So whatever data you put in here to test yourself where you stand vis-a-vis the WEPs is not accessible to anyone. But it gives you a sense on the company, whether it is a beginner, improver, achiever, or a leader in terms of the implementation of the WEPs. And it also gives some of the companies that we have heard from, they start to do the self-assessment and they said, oh, now we have an action plan, because it gives ideas on what you can do more concretely. To celebrate your success, we have on the empowerwomen.org, we are featuring the stories, and we are also in a newsletter sharing stories of good practices of companies and what they do to implement the WEPs. We will also incorporate it, for those who were there in the learning session in the morning, we'll incorporate WEPs learning tools into our virtual skills school. And here you have some of the links, but we also have material at the UN Women booth, so you can learn more about the women's empowerment principles, in addition to the other panelists today. Okay, that was the last slide. I don't think I can do any more. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna. All right, so let's get started with learning from our partners and others who are at the table. So let's start with you, Alice. Tell us about your work in the UAE with the UN Global Compact, because this is basically, and well, share with us what the UNGC is, how that works, and how you've translated that into the women empowerment principles. And of course, we know that all of us are guided by the Sustainable Development Goals. So maybe talk a little bit about those links.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to say, Anna, thank you very much for your presentation. I hope it really helped everyone in the room understand a little bit more about WEPs. I'd like to say I'm really pleased as the chair of the Women's Empowerment Principles Task Force in the UAE to see that we're number 7, considering as how the task force only launched in September this year. So good work to those of you who are in the room who I know are on the task force. But as with the UAE, of course, we've got to be the largest. We've got to have the largest number of signatories. We've got the tallest building in the world. We've got the largest shopping mall. So come on, we need people to be engaged with us. Anyway, my company, Committed to Good, runs humanitarian projects around the world, such as running Ebola treatment clinics in Liberia, running food distribution projects in Sudan, advising the United Nations on the political situation in Somalia. We're focused very much on the conflict-affected countries. And in September 2015, we started our sort of sustainable development programs internally with the launch of the SDGs. We decided to focus on 3 SDGs. I think it's really important that companies don't just think immediately of the philanthropic side of things they can do and how much money they can donate. It's really important for us to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that companies are resourceful and creative. So we chose 3 SDGs, SDG 8 and SDG 16, decent work and economic prosperity and peace, and SDG 5 for gender equality, which really fitted around the work that we do. And in 2017, so this year, we launched a platform called Female First, which is our social impact platform, which pledges to create job opportunities for women in conflict-affected countries and has a goal of 30% of all project-related roles will be represented by women by 2030. So that was our initial journey on the SDGs, and how did we start about it? So when we decided to look at SDG 5 and what we were going to do, the first thing we did was sign WEPs. Then we took the gender gap analysis toolkit. Actually, we did a few steps before we did that, but it's pretty good to do it as a first step to see how we were doing. Now, the gender gap analysis toolkit is actually fantastic for a company that really doesn't know where to start, because it really gives you a lot of ideas of what you could do in terms of making your policies family-friendly, in terms of how you can empower women in your supply chain. So it was a really helpful tool in us in making sure that we'd really done what we can and how we can continue, and it is an evolving process, but how we can continue to support gender equality and the larger objectives under the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay.
So I just sort of really wanted to say that hopefully 2 things that people can take away from this event today is 1, to sign WEPs, and 2, to actually get involved locally. We have this WEPs task force here, and we're creating a network. We'd love to have you come and help us. Thank you.
Make it work. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alice. Okay. Veronica, share. So your company is
Huge company.
a world leader in the world economic, I keep calling it world economic, women empowerment principles. Why? Tell us a bit about your company.
In fact, it started already since company has been established in the early 60s. Just to put a little bit where we are, in fact, we are a big family company, huge one, by the way, French company, French-based company. We are providing the services. We are generating 22 billion of euros of the revenue. We have 425,000 employees worldwide. We are sitting in 80 countries, so we have a very huge footprint.
Who are some of the companies you own? Just so people familiarize with Sodexo a bit.
Sorry?
Who are some of the companies that are in your
In the level of the company, well, we are an own-based company. It's just us, but in the level of how we can compare, well, we are 19th biggest larger employer in the world, so I don't know with whom to compare, but in services, it's kind of good, good position. So we are having the base of the 75 million of people that we are, customers that we are serving each day, so it gives good basis of what we are doing, by the way. So in fact, for us, gender and diversity inclusion, it was part of what we are, because we are a people company, right? We are serving the people. So for us, having diversity inclusion and the gender was established from the very beginning, by the way. And it was not nice to have, it was almost a business imperative. Because we can't ignore, for instance, in terms of the population that we are serving in the world, it's half of the population worldwide. They are women. And among this population, 65% they are talent pool for us. So it was really embedded of what we are, and we were doing this since ever. So in our HR politic, it's embedded also through the leadership, up to the all level. Diversity inclusion is something that we have to deal each day, and it's part of our competitive advantage, I would say.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Diana, EquiLeap, very nice name.
Thank you.
Tell us about EquiLeap. What do you do?
Well, it's very exciting. It's an organization that I co-founded in 2016 together with Joe Andrews in London, and I'm in Amsterdam. And both of us have a background in human rights and in women's rights. And I've been working all my life in women's rights, in sexual and reproductive rights, and in NGOs, organizations, as an activist, as a grant maker. And the last few years, for many reasons, I ended up working in the financial sector. And that's when my eyes opened to the one thing we're missing in the women's movement and when we're trying to reach women's equality within the world. And what we're missing is money. And we've got to move the money. And after having been a fundraiser for 20 years, because for every women's organization that I ended up working for, people would say, oh, Diana, you can tell the story, so you can be the fundraiser. I ended up appreciating moving money for a purpose. But what I started to realize is we're moving money for donations and for grants, and it's peanuts when you consider the money that is out there in the financial sector. It's nothing. If you think about what people donate, it's usually 1 or 2% of whatever it is they already have or they get from their returns. Like the biggest foundations in the world have enormous endowments. These endowments are invested, and it's only the returns of those endowments, which are usually, if they're lucky, 3%, that will go into the donations. So I started to think about how can we move financial capital for women's equality? And if we do that, we will leap to the future, and we will accelerate gender equality. So this is why we created EquiLeap, with this idea that we need to move financial capital to create a better world for everyone and to close that gap that keeps on getting bigger. Because I don't know if you've seen all the reports, but like 3 years ago, they were telling us that the World Economic Forum was telling us that it will take 180 years to close the gender gap, and now they come with a new report saying it's 217 years. So it almost seems like we're not going quickly enough. So I turned to what was already out there as a methodology of being able to measure gender equality within the workforce. And I looked at the reports, and all these great reports by McKinsey, EY, Harvard, and everybody's telling us about this fantastic business case, which we've already heard about the last 2 days here, that when you have more gender equality in a company, the company does better. Financially and socially, it's more sustainable, people are happier, the workforce is happier, and really companies get a higher financial return when there's gender equality. So based on that business case, I thought, how can we measure gender equality in the companies? And I turned to the WEPs, because they already exist. Like Anna was telling us, since 2010, why reinvent the wheel? They're fantastic, they're all there. So EquiLeap took the WEPs, and based on the WEPs, we created a gender scorecard to score gender equality on companies with 19 criteria. And our first project this year was to look at the large caps in the world, like Sodexo. So we said, let's go look at the largest companies around the world based in the 23 developed economies, because that's where most of the money is at. So again, we're following the money and we're trying to find it and use it to our benefit. So we found 3,000 companies around the world in the 23 developed economies with a market cap, like a value of the company of 2 billion or more. And we ranked them and we researched them based on our scorecard with 19 criteria. And this gave us the top 200. And what we've done with this information is that, one, we've given it to the world by producing this report, and I believe that you have a copy of the report, and I'm happy to give a copy to anyone. You can also download it from our website. We produced this report, which has the top 200 companies with the highest gender equality. And I'm very proud to sit in this panel because Sodexo is number 4 of all these large companies around the world. So congratulations. And we said, these are the 200 companies, large companies around the world doing the best. And we researched whether they're giving equal pay, whether they're giving maternity leave, paternity leave, whether they have an anti-sexual harassment policy, whether they're using women-owned businesses in their supply chain. Now, with that data, what we're doing is giving these reports for free, but we're also giving this data to asset managers, and we're charging them so that they can build investment portfolios with our data and create these investment portfolios which we know will create more money for the investors.
Nice.
And that's what, so at this point, we're hoping that at some point we sell enough data that we can cover our costs. And when we have a surplus and when we make a profit, we will use that profit to support projects for women and girls around the world.
Okay, wow, very interesting. Thank you.
But thank you for the WEPs, because it made our life much easier. We had the methodology.
You know, it's great at the UN. There are many things we create like that at a global level, and it's great to know that they're used and actually creating transformation. So thank you, all of you, for biting and taking it on, okay? So Anna, a question. Japan and Turkey have the most companies. Do we see an equal sort of transformation of the economies of Japan and Turkey because they have the largest number of companies that are signatories of the WEPs?
Very good question. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have 230 plus companies in those two markets, which is peanuts. We need to have thousands for it to have a transformative change in the economy.
So there's a critical mass where we will begin to see transformation in terms of
you have
micro
transformation within the companies that are working and implementing, but if you want to see the big transformations that we want to see in the market, we need to have many, many more companies. And I'm so glad for Alice to have committed to making UAE the largest number ever. And we are not happy with 250. It needs to be as tall as the tallest building.
Challenge is set, but I might have to give up my day job.
That's already happening. Yeah, because I think, Alice, on this one, so where are you setting your sights? I mean, you've got 25 companies who are registered. What does that actually mean? And why those 25? Why did they sign up? What is it that they see that's promising, and why should somebody else sign up? Why should you get the 26th signatory?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing, I mean, we're a very new initiative in the UAE. Whilst WEPs has been there since 2010, the UN Global Compact only really adopted it a year ago. And when I first started having conversations with companies about WEPs, they really knew nothing about it at all. It was literally unheard of in the UAE. So we thought, how are we actually going to do this and make a difference? But the one thing that I did find, which was kept on happening, was everyone that I spoke to about WEPs was like, okay, cool, how can I get involved? So that was really positive. So we decided to create this task force, which is 40 organizations. Now, not all of them are WEP signatories, because some of them are academia. Some of them are micro-organizations who are, we call them WEPs volunteers, who all dedicate time on a completely pro bono basis to try and recruit on a business-to-business networking perspective to try and recruit companies to come and sign up. We have a media team who do a lot of social media. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. So, that was really our starting step. I mean, what we're finding here is, first of all, we've got to tell everyone about WEPs, and then I think we're going to hopefully achieve Anna's target of 1,000 people. I'm getting quite hot.
So we need that critical mass. Anna, just to go back to the question about Japan and Turkey, if we were to look at these 7 WEPs, 7 principles, what do we see as the biggest take-up in some of these companies? Is it leadership that they focus on, establish high-level corporate leadership? Is it that they pick up on enterprise development and supply chain? Do they tend to work across all 7, or do they just pick one and say, I'm a WEP signatory, but I'm going to focus on one issue?
So I think it depends a little bit on the context. So picking Japan, for example, where the Prime Minister himself has made great commitments to change the situation in Japan.
He's a he for she, is he not? Yes? He's a he for she
He's a he for
champion, yes?
And that has also put a focus in November, for example. It was the remote working month. And that the leadership comes from the country leadership level, and not only the company, also helps to drive the companies to kind of create this kind of change. And Japan specifically have the challenge that women have had to choose between working or having a family. So the work-life balance issues covered under number 2, the recruitment, retention, promotion, etc., is very, very important. You can look at other countries where you can see, for example, in Canada, which is an interesting model, where companies are only covered at provincial level, not at the federal level, by the legislation, and that province by province have picked up some of these issues. And we have had discussions, for example, with the Ontario Pay Equity Commissioner, that is actually saying that they have built a legislation in such a consultative mode that companies are in it. They have bought into it and they understand it, because they have the choice, of course, to adhere to the law or be punished for not following the law. And they have already been forthcoming and on the equal pay side of it. But what is very interesting is what motivates the companies. We heard about the business case, that is important for some, but in this particular case in Canada, they say, we don't need a business case. Our business case is the fact that the millennials would not accept to work in a company that doesn't have gender equality, that doesn't have the flexi time, that doesn't have work-life balance, that doesn't have leave, that doesn't have parental leave. So the millennials are actually transforming the companies, because companies are competing about the talent. They want the best talent in their companies. And to get and attract the best talent, they need to have those kind of policies in place. So it really comes down to the market, and the fact that the millennials are driving this change is, I congratulate all the youth in the audience for pushing this agenda.
So that could mean that if we brought in 50% to 60% of our staff in most companies are millennials, we should expect to change much faster.
Yes.
In terms of gender equality. That's an interesting point.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let me go back to you. So Sodexo, world leader in this, which one of these principles? I think your role is business development,
Yes.
And supply chain is one of the areas that you work in the most. How have you done it? Have you made progression? I mean, how far are you? Do you have a sense of, how many women-owned businesses supply to you?
I would like just to insist that we sign on all 7 WEPs principles very recently, and we already signed with the 22 countries. We still have some work to be done in the rest of the 80 countries where we operate. So we firmly believe within Sodexo that empowering the women, it has an impact as an individual, also in the community. So there is a way to empower the women through the workplace, through the supply chain as well, and working in the communities. So we have the initiative in the supply chain which is set up on the worldwide basis. It was done in 2014. I'm reading the numbers because I don't want to be wrong. So this initiative called Small Business Big Impact. In fact, we set up the envelope of 2 billion of the spending with the local SMEs and small companies, because we know, and we were targeted about 5,000 of those, we know that most of these companies, SMEs, are handled or managed by the women. So in order to reach the women, we try to pass through the SMEs. Therefore, we had set up the 72 agreements through the different stakeholders, because as a big company that are purchasing lots of goods and services, it's very hard to be in contact directly with the small SMEs. So the role of the different stakeholders are important to us. Therefore, we start to set up the 72 agreements, as I mentioned, which are essentially local communities, NGOs, and different customers as well, who put us in the relation with the SMEs. I heard yesterday in the one panel that one lady, she was telling, she was asking the question, how to reach in the tender process, how she can get a part of the business, part of the cake. I would say it's in our corporate responsibility to go back on the other way around and to search them and to give them opportunity to get into business.
Yeah.
So just one small numbers. For instance, if I'm going very concrete example, in Chile, we start initially, we had a need to be procured in organic honey. And initially, the partnership incorporated about 51 producers of family, it was family producers on the honey. And we invest the money, we invest also, we train them, we give them the processes. And 2 years after that, and they were at that time, they were producing something about 30 tons of the honey. 2 years after that, we have 150 families, mainly driven by the women, by the way. And they're benefiting from the project, and they increased production by 45 tons of honey of the year. So, and we have many of those all around the world. So I think so that we will exceed of 2 billion that we are dedicated to the purchase on such kind of initiative, and that we will spread such kind of initiative a little bit further. I hope so also as well here in Emirates very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, Diana, from your assessment, is that one of the things that you measure? Is it supply chain? What are you seeing in that space, and what is the data? What data are you actually collecting?
Absolutely. So when it comes to the supply chain, the data we want to see is if a company has a policy, a specific policy, to, within their supply chain, one, buy products from women-owned businesses. That's one. The other one is to see if within their supply chain they have an anti-violence, sexual harassment policy, and also a human rights policy. So we're looking at the human rights issues within their supply chain. We're looking at fair wages, which also is not a minimum wage, but whether they offer fair wages. And in the supply chain, women-owned businesses, and the sexual harassment. And the interesting thing is that since we launched in April, there's been 3 investment funds that have been launched already with our data. But there's a new one in the United States. It was just in an article last week that's going to launch in the United States an investment fund. They're calling it WOMEN, W-O-M-N is going to be the name of the ticker. And they were all over the news a week ago about how there's going to be a new investment fund that's going to look at whether there's sexual harassment. The company has a policy anti-sexual harassment and a policy for the supply chain. So what we see is that there is an interest from the investors in this, and that this is data that we should be collecting. And the problem is that sometimes companies will sign the WEPs or they don't sign the WEPs. But even if they do, they don't give us the information. So they're not transparent about the data. So only when we have the data, we can measure it. But when we do, what we see is that when we bundle up the companies that have the higher gender equality score, that they perform better, and so they're interesting for the investors.
Yes. Wow, very interesting. Okay, can I take some questions? I think we have a little bit of time. Yeah, there is a question. Do we have a mic that from the back? Yeah, there's a lady over here with a red jacket. Actually, I can't see the color. It looks sort of pink and I
thread.
see exactly who you are. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ah,
Heidi.
lovely to
Thank
see you, Doctor.
Well, I am Dr. Amani Asfour. I am the World President of the International Federation of Business and Professional Women. And thanks, fantastic for the panels, because one of the very big advocacy pillars of the International Federation of Business and Professional Women, which is present in 110 countries, is government and corporate procurement policy, which is very important about what you're talking about. I don't know if you know that Kenya implemented the government procurement policy. Now 30% of all the government procurement goes to small and medium enterprises, including women, youth, and people with disabilities. If we're talking now about corporate procurement, it's very important that we have to have a special score. I mean, there is WEPs is there, but we need to have a special thing for corporate procurement with all the national companies to encourage the corporates and also to let the information be aware about the women on the ground, because, for instance, we are present in 110 countries in the world. Our platform, we can disseminate the information across the world. But we need from all the corporates, and maybe you can guide us on that, how can we, as you mentioned, train the women? Because when the government procurement or corporate procurement is one thing, but meeting the criteria and the standard and the certification of the corporate for the products is another thing. So this thing, we are working on it with many multinational companies to see how can our women, if they access the tender or they are going to procure to a corporate, how can they meet the standards and what can we train them to meet this quality and to their product to be competitive in order to go into competition, fair competition, not only because they are women, but their products is quality and competitive and standard.
Thank you. Right in front of you in a green jersey.
Hello.
And please tell us your name.
My
Tell
name
us
is
who you are.
Manar. I am a Canadian entrepreneur. Right now, here in the UAE, I'm not working, but I used to have a manufacturing company in Canada. The reason why I'm introducing myself like this is just I just want to ask, and I don't want to be misread. I want to know, like, usually women, they want to have the best of two lives. They want to have the social life or family life. They want to have children. They want to be mothers. And also they want to succeed in life or be entrepreneurs. Thank goodness I had my own business, so I had no problem. My kids were with me all the time. But in terms of empowering women, do you respect the other side? I mean, not only the professional side. Do you try to help her with being, a family member also? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think there was one behind. Okay, let's pass it there, and then we have.
You now told
Yeah?
us.
Shall I go for it?
Yeah, go ahead, and then we have another one at the back with the white.
Yeah, I have to take it. Not
Okay.
Hi, I'm Anne Carole. I'm from France. I'm actually creating a company called Women Dare at 50 Plus. The reason why I'm asking, I have a question. It's listening to you all, and after having lived these 2 thrilling days here, I'm struck by the change of pace we have to go for. And listening to Diana, who was kindly remembering us all that if the current pace doesn't change, it will take 217 years to reach the gender equality on the planet. I've made a quick math. This means 10 generations. Yeah, it's 10 generations. So that's the one math. And the other one is I hear about this great initiative, and I saluted the WEPs, but it's been created 7 years ago, and 1,665 signatures across the globe in 7 years. It's 238 per year. So my question is not at all a critic, it's how can we all contribute to make this thing happen? I heard the call to action that Phumzile and the people from UAE were sharing with us yesterday and throughout these 2 days, which is there's a termination, clock is ticking. I mean, 2030 is in 13 years. It's going to go like that. So how can we all accelerate this? How can we make this happen? Because it's not going to happen. It's going to take 10 generations, and we're going to be having this panel in 10 generations and still complaining for this not to happen. So it's in our hands to make this and give it fast track to implementation.
Thank you. Thank you for the energy. appreciate the question. There's a question there at the back in the white.
My name is Nada Abdin. I have a master's degree in management with rich experience. I have my own experience in getting my path as a businesswoman, let's say. I'm so delighted to be here and hear these fruitful discussions, but it seems all from the point of view of companies' owners, to encourage them to be involved in empowering women. My question is, every day I meet women who has the ambition, have the desire to fulfill their dream or to utilize their knowledge. What are the practical steps to be involved and empowered? How they can reach these companies which are keen on empowering women?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let me come back to you. Diana, let me start with you.
Okay, lots of really good questions. I think I'll try to answer all of them in an order. You know, when you asked how many investors are in the room, nobody raised their hand. Or did any of you raise your hand? I don't think so. Huh? We can move this quicker if we start also investing ourselves. In the past 2-3 months, there are new investment funds in Europe. There's one called Elle, like she in French. It's available to any European. You can invest here with 20 euros or more, and you'll be investing in the companies with the highest gender equality. So that's one way. In Canada, there's another fund. It's called HERS. There's going to be a new one coming up in the United States, and there's another one that's coming global. So all of us have to also start thinking that we need to put our money where our hearts are, where our minds are, the money of our NGOs, the money of our wallets, and we can start small, and there's these ETF funds that are popping up all over with the gender lens. So that's one way that we can start doing that. And we hope very much that there will come an investment fund. So if you know of anybody in the Middle East here that would like to have an investment fund with a gender lens, we can make that happen. And there are these investment funds that you can start with $20 to $30, you don't have to be much. So that's one way that I think that we can all start moving our money with our values. And I think that the companies with the procurement, the women will produce good products, I'm sure of it, if the companies want it. So the moment it's the companies that say, we want to have, within our procurement, women-owned companies and products, there will be women who produce excellent products. I'm sure of that. So I think what we have to get is to get the companies to want that. On the question of the family side, when it comes to gender equality, we're measuring whether a company is giving flexible working hours and flexible time, and whether a company is giving fathers paid paternity leave. Because we don't want the burden of the family, the mothers, the children, to all lie within the women of the family. It should also be for the men, and it's an opportunity for men to be good fathers, which I think many men would love to do if they would get the opportunity of paid paternity leave. So I think that these are all the ways that we can accelerate and really contribute, and we can all move. And then again, it's about, I'd like to encourage us to keep on thinking not of money as a dirty thing or something that we need, but really something that we can use. And we can all be investors, and even just giving a phone call to your pension company or pension plan and say, are you investing with a gender lens, is a way to make a difference.
Yeah, okay. Anna?
Yeah, I think Diana covered a lot of the points. So I would just address
Especially,
the issue.
yeah.
Yes, we have very short
that was
time.
the issue about,
To address
will we still be here in 200 years, the same panel having the same conversation?
No, the deadline is 2030.
With two broken feet at the time.
The deadline is 2030, so we are very much in a rush. And I just wanted to mention that as UN Women, we are going to work next year, for the next few years, together with the EU, and really making a push. We are designing a project with them on the women's empowerment principles, and it's to raise awareness, have campaigns, and we'd love for all of you to join to make sure that this rate of signing for 1,600 companies is no longer going to happen. We will have not 1,600 per day maybe, but to have a big number that is accelerating with a campaign. Because what we heard, many of the issues are really about awareness. Once we have filled that information gap, I'm sure that there will be many, many companies following, and we can build the big tower of WEPs companies in the UAE.
You know, I would like to add my voice a little bit to that issue of how do we speed up. You know, if you look at how movements happen, you know, there's a theory of the diffusion of innovation, right? And it's really about the path to building a critical mass. These 1,600 companies are the early adapters. And I don't know what percentage of the companies that we want to target those are, but they are the early adapters. So I think what we need to do, perhaps, Anna, as we're thinking about this, and with all of those of us who are working in this space, we're just a few of us. Many, many different people are in this space. But as we think about it, you know, as you put that challenge to us, maybe part of what we need to be thinking about is what really is a target that we need to figure out that's a critical mass? Do we need 10,000 companies, 5,000 companies? At what level? What should it look like in order for us to know that it will then gather moss and roll faster than we need to, so that we don't have to be pushing uphill all the time? So I think that's part of how we need to think about it. So it's a very good question to put on the table. And I think those of us who are working in countries where we're putting that on the table, what we're trying to do is to enter spaces, and I just mentioned it earlier, that in South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has a gender policy requirement now. The gender policy doesn't say you have to have 50% or whatever, but it has a gender policy, which means that no company can register on the stock exchange without that gender policy. And we're now trying to push them to make sure that they go through the women empowerment principles. So examples like the more of that we have, the bigger we're able to push this, right? I wonder what you think, Alice, about some of the questions that were put. And we're going to have to wrap up shortly, so I think we've got about 10 minutes, and then we've got to close the panel. So, yeah?
Well, I actually think WEPs answers a lot of the questions. So implementing WEPs, and I'm going to take it as a CEO perspective on this, the first thing you have to do is sign your commitment as the CEO. So it's got the leadership behind it. The second thing you have to do, I think it's 2 to 4, the principles 2 to 4, is actually implement some family-friendly policies. The lady who asked about, you know, sort of part-time things that are suited for people who want to have flexible working or things like that. So that requires probably your senior management team, certainly your legal team, certainly your policy writers, but certainly your HR, to actually start thinking about how to make your organization more gender sensitive. And then you've got really to get your staff engaged. So we actually started by running a training on International Women's Day, what better day to choose, to actually tell everyone that we were signing the WEPs and what we were going to do and our plans around it. We ran surveys throughout our company to get everyone's anonymous surveys, so people felt that they could come forward with suggestions. But it's getting your team involved in it. And I think, you know, it was actually my team who, you know, through innovation that started thinking about principle number 6. So how can we have a wider impact on the marketplace and the community? So I think actually, and then you have to publicly report, and you can choose Equileap's amazing reporting platform, or you can choose the UN Global Compacts to actually get your public commitment out there and your reporting and prove that you're measuring your results. But I think WEPs is actually a really good answer to really trying to make your organization gender friendly.
Gender friendly, okay. Veronica.
Yeah. I would like to pick up on the question asked by the young lady. I'm 50 plus, so it's important to say, right, because I have very often this question coming from the young and less young ladies in our organization to see what we are doing for them in terms of the work balance, because it's not easy in the different period of your professional life, when you are a mother, when you are then after with young children, bigger children, and so on. So each part of the life demanding the work balance that we didn't work in the company at that time. And in fact, we use the gender balanced, that initiate work-life balance question, and we work on this because it is part of our engagement. We have the corporate responsibility plan where we are really taking care of our employees because it's essentially, this is our richness. So we implemented over the last 3 years work-life balance that, by the way, we inspire ourselves to sell it, by the way, to the corporation and organization that we are delivering the services. So we start within the company and we're learning little by little. Sometimes it's hard because depending on the legislation where we are sitting, we are working in different countries and legislation are different. But we are trying to improve ourselves in terms of the quality of life for our employees, especially for the women. And we are deploying. It's a part of our incentive objectives because we incentivize all those elements. It's a leadership commitment. But also after that, it's a cultural aspect because it has to be embedded to all levels of the companies. So again, I think so it's belief of the how we are, what we are doing within the companies, right? So this is the first question. Another question, it was about the how to, what was it? It was the how to become the businesswoman in the, I'm sorry, I forgot exactly what was the question about.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, what are the steps for more women to be able to
Practical
participate
steps.
in the businesses?
Right.
Yeah.
So what we do, again, I can give you just example in our company. Again, it's coming from the leadership. We have this advisory board, which is set up by the women and men, not just the women. It's a kind of mix because we have learned, and we learn a lot from the men, by the way. It has to be mixity because this is the richness. And they guide us in some principles how to overcome some aspects of the, I would say, what we are as women. Sometimes we are all barrier to the improvement, to going forward, which is very true, because when you're proposing the job to the ladies, she needs to comply in her head about 80% of the job, where the men, 50, they say, yes, I can do it. So it's very simple things, but it helps. So we have this advisory board, we call SWIFTS, Sodexo Women International Talent Forum, where we are going to each countries and we are talking to the people, to the ladies essentially, in fact, to promote them, to advise them, to assign them the mentors that they will lead the ladies in the professional life, and then we measure. It's not just about advice, it's also about the measure, how they're going with it 2 years from now, did they learn, did they moving? So that's how we do, and the only advice that I can give you is to have a mentor and to be in the company, I would say, which is healthy, because the richness of any company are the people, right? So I'm not sure if I give the answer.
No, I think so. I think so. Okay. No, I think we're going to wrap this up. I think we've got a couple of more minutes. So I'm going to go through each of you and let you give us a sort of summary comment. And I really would like you to think about two things. The one is about how do we scale this and speed this up faster? So how do we actually spread the lessons from everything that you're talking about and sort of make this a global movement in a serious way? So that's the one question. And then the other question is, I think what I heard from a couple of people in the room was really about we're all speaking about this from really the demand side, from the company side, you know. But one of the big things we're talking about at this conference is the voice of women and women's own participation and so on. So if you were to flip it, you know, and you're Sodexo, and you're talking from a women business associations or women companies or, you know, women entrepreneurs or people who could do business with you, what would you advise? So what is it? Where would you invest to be able to make sure that more and more women can actually take advantage of the fact that there are women empowerment principles? So you're measuring this work, Diana. What is it that we could do on the other side to actually create more energy for women to be able to engage with these private companies?
On the other side, on
And
the
then
NGOs, what do you mean?
women business associations, women entrepreneurs. So I'm trying to see, because somebody was asking the question, and I think it's a question I hear often. When we talk about it from the company side, it sounds as if, you know, we're doing all the work we can do on our side, but we may not be doing as much work to get to bridge the gap between the companies themselves and women.
Yeah.
Right?
So transparency is key. I think that making sure that the companies are transparent and they have the data, we've talked about this, and this is key. companies will change for 3 reasons. Because their employees want it, and otherwise they leave, and the companies don't want to lose their employees. Because the consumers want it, and otherwise they won't buy the products, and so they have to change the consumer on the consumer side, or because the investors want it. And I tend to think that every one of us falls into one or multiple of these categories. We're either an employee, we're either a consumer of products, or we're an investor of products. And so my advice is use whatever role you're in, and use that power to be able to try to make the change within the companies.
Okay, all right. And what about speeding this up? How do we scale this work?
Money. I mean, I go back to the first point that I said. The things will speed up the moment that the companies think I can make more money, I can get more investors, my products will be better, my employees, the good employees will stay here, I won't lose them, I have the capacity. So
should we target stock exchanges? I mean,
absolutely.
I'm talking at sort of a
we
global
should,
level.
and we should learn. And one of my criticism of the women's movements is we don't know enough about money and investing. And I really think that now there's a lot of products out there that you can invest with little bits of money, the exchange traded. So it's about learning how to invest with a gender equality lens. And I think that we all have more power than we know. And if we use investment power, it will go quicker. Absolutely.
Alice, your last word?
Well, I think really the key is business-to-business marketing in terms of how do we get more organizations involved. I mean, if everyone in this room here reached out to 5 companies that they work with and told them about the WEPs and asked them to sign up, I'm guessing we'll have about 150 signatories of WEPs by the end of the week. So it would be really great. But I think business-to-business networking is really, really key in this. The more people we can talk about it, it's not scary. It's 7 simple steps, the WEPs. They really are. And the first is just getting your CEO to sign. And it's, you know, the more people who are behind it, the more people who are talking about it, the more people will sign up.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
Veronica.
we are already working quite, I think so quite well. We can always do better, right? I just hope that in Emirates, because I'm quite new and I have been settled here for the purpose, in fact, to try to flow down the WEPs principles within with the GCCs, essentially in Emirates. And I would like to be in touch with the governmental representative in order to see how we can work tighter and together, because we have some ideas and we can bring some ideas in order to be better from the perspective as a service provider, but also as a corporate citizen in UAE.
What would it take for Sodexo to beat L'Oréal as the top country in terms of the WEPs?
Well, it's one of our best customer, I would say worldwide. There we are, French company both, and you know it's going to be hard, but we are still better, even though the numbers. It's likely it doesn't show that, right? But
you're still better.
You have 3 places to come.
You have 3 places to get.
Right. Okay.
So I'll leave you guys having that debate about whether you're top or not. Anna, how are we going to...
No, I just want to first just thank the other panelists. When we started to conceptualize this discussion, it was very clear to us, I mean, as the WEP Secretariat, we heard from Sodexo every week for the past 6 months, a new part of the company signing in every country, 22 countries by now. And every time you sign, you make us busy. So we got emails, and we know, and we've heard, and we said, if we're inviting one company to this conversation, it's Sodexo. So thank you so much for doing the great work. The same thing when it comes to the networking and the activity on the ground. Of course, UAE being here and all the efforts that we see going into signing up 5 companies every month. This is a great effort. And of course, Diana with the index. So I'm so excited to have brought everyone together and have this exciting conversation, because these are real champions. And I would like to extend an invitation to all of you to become champions like that in your own role. As we heard, all of us have a responsibility of what we can do, whether we are in a company or outside. What we heard in the morning in the innovation and learning session, it just requires one champion in a company to drive that change. And so can you please commit to all be those champions? When you register to the summit, you have an opportunity to make a pledge. And all of the pledges that you might have noticed were aligned with the WEPs. And I hope that you will leave the room with that. Just picking up a final point on the transparency. I had a conversation, for example, with IKEA. They're completely transparent. They go out with the public data, they show it, and I said, so many other companies are fearful of putting the data out there. What makes you different? And they just said, once the data is out there, we have to comply. So the only way that we will get everyone to go towards the goal that we have publicly announced, that's the only way where we can achieve those. So more transparency leads to more action. And just finally, on the stock exchanges, every year on the 8th of March, we are celebrating with the stock exchanges, ring the bell. 8th of March on the International Women's Day. So get together. I don't know if you're doing something here.
Yes, we do.
Yes, great. And in every country there will be a ringing of the bell in the stock exchange to celebrate gender equality and the progress that we made. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. No, we have to wrap it up now, unfortunately. I can see there's people who are enthusiastic about adding to the conversation, but we can't do that now. We're going to wrap it up, and I think because this is 16 days to end violence against women, I will say that in one of the largest retail companies in South Africa, it's a clothing retailer, they have taken on the challenge of gender violence and have began to invest, and right now, after about 2 years of partnering with them, have over 400 women, survivors of violence, who they are investing in becoming entrepreneurs and suppliers to their supply chain. Nice. So I think the stories are amazing, and so with this Women Empowerment Principles network that we're creating, I think the more of these stories that we gather, and the bigger that we tell the stories around the world, the more likely we are that we're going to see some real transformation. And now that I think we have the presence of the UAE leadership here, I think we really want to summarize this session and say that there is a real opportunity to transform the economy here with the women empowerment principles that we have. We're challenging and putting on the table and asking the UAE to become one of those countries, if not the country in the world, that leads in terms of companies being signatories to the Women Empowerment Principles. And so we thank you and hope that we can all together and collectively join hands to beat that 180, 200 years before gender equality. 2030 is our expiration date, so let's work together to make that happen. Thank you so much to each of you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.